I'm Hannah, the Wife Without Kids. This channel is all about creating a positive community to support you in your child-free life. A few weeks ago, I put out a poll and I asked you guys, what would you like to see on my channel? And one of the things you guys were very interested in seeing is an interview with other child-free individuals. So today I'm going to be interviewing Mikayla. She is a 20-something millennial that is a child-free. Welcome to the channel, Mikayla. I'm so happy to have you.
Hi, I'm happy to be here.
When I contacted you and asked you to be on my channel because I wanted to interview you, do you remember what you said to me?
Yeah, I said, sure, if you want me to, but I feel like I'm really young and my opinion is not necessarily really relevant to the space, but I would come on and answer your questions anyway.
When you said to me, oh, I'm young, I don't know that much, I was like, no, that's exactly what I want. I want someone that's younger than me because it's been a while since I've been in my 20s. And I'd like to see from talking to you if people's perception and people's perspective of child-free people has changed at all since I was your age. So Mikayla has absolutely no idea what I'm going to be asking her. We did not review these questions ahead of time, so everything that she says is going to be very authentic and it's not rehearsed at all. My first question for you is going to be, yes, you're in your 20s and you're young, but when did you decide or when did you have an inkling that you wanted to be child-free?
I didn't really realize that it was a choice until probably I was 18 or 19. And then people would ask me oh, how many kids do you want one day? And I'd be like, I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure I even want kids. And then at first it was just kind of an idea. I wasn't for sure I don't want kids. And then as I just thought about it more and thought about my goals for the future, I kind of realized that children didn't really fit into that idea of what I wanted. And that's kind of when I realized that I didn't want kids. There wasn't a moment in my life where I was yeah, I don't want kids. I didn't even think about it growing up because I just grew up in this atmosphere where it's you get married, you have children, and that's just the way life goes. I don't really see them fitting into my life. And I just decided that they weren't really for me.
I think that's how it works for a lot of people. You don't have this one defining moment in your life. It's almost you kind of come to a realization as you're growing up. Mm-hmm. It's interesting that you said you've grown up in a family, and I think this is true for the majority of pretty much probably 99% of the population. We grow up in families where we don't really talk about being child-free or that child-free is even an option. We just grow up, you eventually get married, you eventually have kids, and that's just sort of the trajectory that's sort of assumed that everyone is going to take at some point. So it's interesting that it was basically when you became an adult and people started asking you that question that you started thinking, hey, actually, I do have an option not to have kids. When you talk to your family about being child-free, what is their feedback? How do they respond to that?
I would say it's pretty mixed. I think in the beginning, when I first said it, my grandmother and my mother, I think their initial reaction is that they're sad, I'm going to be missing out on something. And yeah, maybe I will be missing out on something, but I think that they react that way maybe because they think they'll be missing out on something, on the great grandkids and the grandkids. But I think that when they actually hear my reasons for it, I think that they end up maybe more so seeing where I'm coming from and more maybe agreeing with me.
People are going to react to you in different ways. Mm-hmm. But initially, yeah, I find initially families tend to be a little bit maybe sad that you're making that choice, or they feel a little bit let down, or they don't quite understand why you would be making that choice.
Obviously, to both my grandparents and my parents, they all had kids, right? And that was just normal to them, and that's the way they lived their life. So it's probably hard to understand that I may not necessarily want to do that with myself. So I think that that's probably where they're coming from too, right?
Well, that totally makes sense. You mentioned that some of the plans that you have for life don't really include kids. So would you feel comfortable talking about some of the things that you want to accomplish in your future or that you see yourself doing?
Absolutely. I want to buy a house one day, and I don't necessarily live in the most affordable housing market area. So kids are inexpensive. They're financially straining. And I don't want to live my whole life being financially strained. So they don't really fit in that area. I also have a really expensive hobby. I'm really into horseback riding, which is incredibly expensive. And one day, I've been waiting ever since I was a kid to have my own horses and just do that whole thing. And that does not suit children at all. And then I also really want a successful career. I don't want to be a stay-at-home mom. I really want to excel in my career and be successful in it. So that's going to take, if I had children, that would take me away from that. And it wouldn't be fair to children to leave them to go work on my career if I chose to have them. So they're not necessarily the reasons I chose not to have children, but there's some of the major reasons that made me think about why I didn't want kids, just because I didn't picture them in my future and how they would fit into my future.
You've obviously taken time to think about what you want and how would kids fit in or how would kids not fit in. People maybe don't think about it as much. And so you just have them. And then suddenly you're like, oh, wait, but I still want to do this career thing and I have kids. And that can be a really hard juggle and a really hard balance for people to do. So the fact that you've already been thinking ahead and figuring out this is kind of what I want my life to look like, and then taking steps to make that happen. And for someone your age, I think that's actually really remarkable. That's really good insight that you have into your life already.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that's necessarily normal. Like, I don't think a lot of people my age are, like a lot of my friends, they're not thinking about that. And maybe it's just because like they want kids for sure. Like I know a lot of people who just do know that they want kids. And I think just a lot of people like where we are in our lives, we're just not thinking about that. But I'm very much a planner and I'm pretty logical. So that's so just something that naturally just comes to me. I don't think it would necessarily be something that everyone my age is thinking about.
Being a planner and logical can be a very huge advantage to life. So that might give you a head start. Have you told your friends how you feel about having kids, that you're not really interested in having them?
Yeah, so my best friend, she really wants kids. So we're really different in that way. And actually a lot of my friends want kids. So yeah, they definitely, when they find out I don't want them, they're actually pretty surprised. Just literally the other day, someone said to me, and she's like, oh, all I want to be is a mom. And I was just like, wow, I can't relate to that whatsoever. Like, I don't even think about that. I know a lot of people who want kids. I don't really know so many that don't.
That's funny that you say that because, yeah, I felt the same way. I was like, well, I don't want kids and all my friends wanted kids. And I was like, yeah, that's not relatable to me either, like at all. So in a previous conversation that you and I have had together that was off camera, you mentioned that you were dating. And so I am curious, how did you bring up that you did not want kids with your boyfriend? How soon in your relationship did you bring that up? And what was his reaction?
I don't actually remember the first time bringing it up. I think it's always been really clear. Like I've always been really clear about not wanting kids. I don't think there was like an initial conversation. We have had quite a few conversations about it because he never thought about it. He was definitely more like, he just thought that was just like the natural course of life. So before dating me, he never actually thought about how that was an option. It has caused some strain and like we've definitely had tons of conversations about it, but I can't initially remember bringing it up. I just know from the beginning, I told him like, if that's a deal breaker for you, then like, I'm not the one for you. You gotta go find someone else.
You talked about it, which is huge because some people don't mention it or they don't mention it for a long, long time, but it sounds like you were really upfront. And that is something that you guys will definitely get to figure out together. And I do think it is pretty common for guys not to think about having kids. Like, I think that's probably more of a female thing. Even with my own husband, he never really thought about it. It was, you know, when it came up in conversation with him and I, he was like, oh yeah, you know what? I don't really want kids either. I'm fine not to have them. But yeah, I don't think guys are usually the ones that bring that up in a conversation or get that started. Up to the woman.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. He grew up in a really large family, so he has quite a few siblings. So he's just used to that. He just thinks it's normal. It's definitely something that's like opened his mind up. Whereas before, I don't think he ever even thought about it before we started dating. So it's definitely been interesting.
Yes, it would make for some very interesting conversations.
Absolutely.
You mentioned previously that a lot of your friends want to have children. So are your friends in that stage where they're starting to have kids or they're just saying they want kids, but they don't have them yet?
I do have a few friends who have kids. Obviously, they're really young. And the kids are really young, like babies. But most of my friends haven't started to have kids yet.
With your friends that have kids now, has that changed your relationship or your friendship with them at all?
I definitely think that it's hard to relate to them maybe now because they're so busy being parents. And I couldn't imagine that right now at this stage of my life. Yeah, so it definitely changes the dynamic of the relationship, but it's not like I resent them for having children or anything, but I would definitely say that it changes the relationship for sure.
Does that make you feel excluded or lonely at all?
No, not at all. I wouldn't say that at all. No. Most of my friends don't have kids yet, so it'll be interesting to see what it's like when they all do have kids.
What is one of the most common things that people say to you when they find out that you don't want to have kids? So let's say this is someone maybe that you don't know really well, so not a family member, but someone outside of that.
It depends on who I'm talking to. It's not really something that I advertise because I'm really young. People will always tell me that I'll change my mind. That's the first thing I hear. And then they'll ask me how my boyfriend feels about that. And usually I shut down the conversation at that point because I'm just not interested in like disclosing my personal life to strangers. But Yeah, so usually at that point I get a little uncomfortable and I'm like, I don't really want to talk about this anymore.
And those can be such awkward conversations. It's good that you just say, hey, I just shut the conversation down. And that sometimes is the best thing if that's what you feel comfortable doing, because it can be hard to sort of explain all of this to someone that, you're meeting for the first or second time.
Yeah, absolutely.
People definitely do tend to assume that everyone is going to be a parent someday. And so from your perspective, why do you think that society just feels that way towards women?
I think it's just common because of history, because of media, because of religion. I think that that's just the progression of life. I don't think it's necessarily even like a cognitive decision that people make to think that. I think it's just the way that people are brought up. They just do because of the way that they are raised.
So it's almost just a default way of thinking. You're a woman, you're going to be a mother, you definitely want kids. And then if you don't want kids, there's probably something wrong with you.
Well, yeah, because when I was a kid and I looked at the women in my life, 90% of them had children. So, and the ones that didn't, it was either because they were single or because they couldn't have kids. It wasn't because they didn't want them necessarily. That's just the way that I just viewed it, that was just normal. Like grown women just had kids. I think that that's the way a lot of people just view it like that.
Now, I know you think that you're really young and that you might not have any advice, but I'm sure that you do because you're an intelligent lady. If one of your friends was considering being child-free, would you have any advice for them?
You can live your whole life wondering what if. Like, I know a lot of young couples who have broken up because they're like, well, what if I marry this person who doesn't want kids and one day I do? I just think you have to think about how you want to live in the future, like your goals, and you have to consider how children would fit into that. And if you can see yourself achieving your goals in the future and living a happy life with that person without kids, then you can't think about, well, what if one day I do want them? Because what if one day you do want them? Like, you could live your whole life that way. I think you have to be really honest with yourself and think like really logically, because at the end of the day, the what ifs can go on forever.
That's very true. And the what ifs can go on about any topic. It's not just children. I mean, that happens through all of our lives. We make the best decisions that we know how to make and for the time that we're living. And maybe sometimes we'll say, hey, maybe I could have made a different decision. But I think we find a way to just continue living life. Life isn't over because you made a decision that maybe you have some questions about later in the future.
Exactly.
And I think that is good advice.
And I think that another thing I would say to people my age is just because you don't have kids, you're not necessarily missing out on some like great experience in your life that's going to change the value of your life. Don't worry about that, because if you don't really feel the pull to be a parent, then that's fine. That doesn't necessarily mean that your life is any less or that you're going to be missing out on some great experience just because you're not going to have kids. Obviously, it's still going to have meaning and it's still going to be important.
I completely agree with that, because I think different things appeal more to some people than other people, right? But if your heart's not in it, your heart's not in it.
Absolutely, yeah. Having kids is a lot of dedication and it's a lot of hard work. And if you don't really want it, you'll just end up resenting them. And that's not great either. That's not how you want to live your life, right? In that case, it's almost better to play it safe if you're not really sure what you want.
There can definitely be some resentment if you did something that you didn't really want to do because you felt pressured to do that. Do you feel that there's any pressure for you as a female to have babies and to be a mom?
I think maybe. I think I used to feel that there was pressure, but more and more I've just realized that it's nobody's choice but my own. If I have kids, it's going to be me who's putting in the effort every day. So I'm not allowing myself to feel that pressure, but maybe I definitely used to feel it. I remember dating a high school boyfriend and he was like, oh, I want 4 kids. And I was like, oh, I guess I'm going to have 4 kids someday. Because obviously in high school, I thought I was just going to be with that person forever. But I didn't realize that nobody can put that pressure on me if I don't allow them to. So I've just decided that I'm not going to feel that anymore.
Those are very wise words. You're right. Nobody can put that pressure on you. You just don't let yourself feel that pressure, right? People can say everything that they want to say, but if you've already made your choice, there really isn't pressure because you've already made your choice. And that's the choice that fits you the absolute best. And you know yourself better than the high school boyfriend probably did.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love that you mentioned that because I think that's really important for individuals that feel that pressure to have children. It is absolutely 100% their choice. And if they don't want to do it, they just don't have to. And it's honestly as simple as that.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for talking to me, Mikayla. I really appreciated your answers. They were really thoughtful, and I know that they are going to be really helpful to other millennials out there that are considering whether or not they want to have children.
Well, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed being here.
Thank you for watching, and remember that you are never alone. I will see you all next week.